I think Sandy's very brave because she just said that on TV. I think that's very brave. And I think that Busboys and Poets is a very brave bookstore. I just started, you probably don't feel like you're brave because you're so used to doing things in the service of social justice and in the service of community. But I just started touring with this book, and I've changed so much working on this project. I feel like it's a very open-minded book. I don't need anybody to undermine their deeply held beliefs. I don't presume to know when life begins. I really am open to learning more, and the project has kind of brought me there. I used to be much more, George, get your laws off my body, you're out of my bush, all that stuff. I used to be that kind of feminist, and I feel like I've opened up my ears and eyes a lot to just listening. But it's interesting, just merely having the word abortion on this book has meant that bookstores have pulled out of events, bookstores that always bring me in. And my other books, I was giggling today because one of the listings here in D.C., mentioning this reading said, and maybe this is what brought you, said, Jennifer Baumgardner's career is sort of a feminist freak show. And so anyway, they're not scared of the other feminist freaky things, but there's something about abortion that's, that people would rather just keep quiet about, and I think it's not good. There have been protesters at other events, and I think that sometimes, and maybe this bookstore will deal with this too, sometimes bookstores are really having to deal with not just crazies who are writing anonymous things to them, but people that they really care about in their community having concerns, because abortion is such a serious issue, it's such an emotional issue, it's such a divisive issue. And so I guess I want to say from the outset that I get it. I understand that it is. And I started this project because I also knew that it was a very common experience, and it was a very silenced experience, and that combination is not good. Silence never gets us really anywhere, and if I could just open up a little bit of space for people to be able to talk about their abortion experiences, that would probably be enough. That would be a good thing. So that's what this project is. I'm going to read a little bit from the book and then talk a little bit about the project, and then if people have questions, I would love to hear them and make this more of a conversation. And they said that there's a microphone set up so you can be heard. I don't remember when I first heard the word abortion, but what I do recall is this. By age 4, I knew generally how babies were made because my mother became pregnant with my sister Jessica, and she insisted on explaining to us in the most clinical and explicit terms possible about vaginas, sperms, eggs, and intercourse. I had that kind of family. My parents weren't hippies. Far from it. In fact, having been raised in small-town North Dakota during the 50s, they were anything but wild. I, too, was raised in North Dakota, but I was a child of the 70s, and my youth was colored by the cultural movements of the time, including feminism. The second wave of feminism ushered in consciousness and discussion about birth and bodies, as well as a woman's right to control both of these things herself. My mother recalls showing my grandma the photos of childbirth in Our Bodies, Ourselves, and Grandma, who had given birth to 8 children, 3 when she was still a teenager, said that she had never glimpsed a baby's head crowning out of a vagina before. She was fascinated. I feel like I'm saying vagina a lot for C-SPAN. This is kind of fine, I'm sure. We had Ms. magazine in the house with its frequent headlines about reproductive freedom, and I think I absorbed what ending an unwanted pregnancy was before anyone ever talked to me about it. But the first real conversation I had about abortion occurred when I was 10. My family was visiting friends in Iowa City. The mother in that family, Laurel, was a strong feminist, intense and intimidating to me at that time. Laurel had 2 identical pins the size of $50 on her kitchen bulletin board, both depicting the pro-choice symbol of that generation, a wire hanger with a red bar stuck through it. I was intrigued and asked if I could have one. She held a pin out and she looked me right in the eye. "I'll give this to you," she said sternly, "but only if you understand what it means and only if you wear it." Her intensity made me momentarily nervous, but at the same time I was flattered that she was taking me so seriously. I took the button from her and I took its message to heart. The point of that button was, of course, the assertion that a woman should never be forced to thrust a hanger through her cervix into her uterus because she's pregnant and had no access to a legal abortion. Now, for Laurel's generation and for Laurel herself, this hanger meant something literal. Laurel was the sole confidant, with the exception of her friend's mother, of a friend who had had an illegal abortion in 1964. This girl's mother, who insisted that the father could never find out, had found the abortionist and taken her terrified daughter to an actual back alley to meet her fate. After the abortion, the girl bled copiously. 6 years later, Laurel flew with another pregnant friend to New York City, this time for a legal abortion. The difference was staggering, Laurel now recalls. This second friend just walked out of the clinic. She came back to the hotel. She was fine. There were no secrets and no hemorrhaging. Now, for my generation in the United States, the hanger doesn't evoke memories of barriers that women faced. The image is abstract. It's not quite relevant, a marker of another time, and despite claims to the contrary, not likely to be part of our future, even if Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision that made abortion legal in all 50 states, were to be overturned. Right, and the district, that's true. How dare I overlook the district? The district was one of the early places that made it legal in 70. So you guys are ahead in, I'm sure, lots of different ways. A current symbol of reproductive freedom, what would that be? A gun with a strike through it to represent the clinic violence that marked the 1980s to the mid-90s, killing 3 doctors and 4 other clinic workers. The fleshy pink faces of Senator Jesse Helms and Representative Henry Hyde, both of whom signed into law restrictions that mean poor women have very limited access to early abortion and birth control information. Angel's wings to indicate the thousands of women who have abortions and yet believe that the fetus has a soul and is watching over them. Or perhaps an open mouth to illustrate the growing movement of women and men who are speaking out about their abortion experiences, from the after-abortion counseling groups like Backline and Exhale, to the zine Our Truths, Nuestras Verdades, to the film Silent Choices, and the Abortion Diaries. These are just some of the images that have animated the last few decades and that speak to my experience, the experience of my peers, younger women and men raised in the wake of legal abortion. After years of thinking and writing about this topic, I've learned many things that bolster my belief that supporting abortion rights without restrictions is the most ethical position one can take. Because I've seen ample evidence that abortion is the result, not the cause of social problems. Dilemmas such as inadequate access to health care, female poverty, sexual violence, they all remain pernicious, and there's no doubt that if we address those issues, we'd reduce the need for abortion. 17% of those who terminate unplanned pregnancies are teenagers, many of whom have shrinking access to sex education or birth control, since most states accept federal money that mandates abstinence-only education. Meanwhile, women on Medicaid often receive less effective generic forms of birth control that contain only 80% of the hormones in brand name pills. And when I hosted poor women who had traveled to New York for their abortions, because in New York you can get abortions up to 24 weeks, every single one said she got pregnant while on the pill, leading me to believe that generic birth control is a problem that needs to be addressed. For those people who are horrified about abortion, and I'm more sympathetic to this perspective than I once was, it is crucial to confront social injustices that precede the embryo, fetus, or baby, and to accept that it might not be possible to ever truly abolish abortion. In fact, countries in which abortion is legal and those in which it is a crime have similar abortion rates, and the abortion rate is dropping more quickly in countries that provide above-ground procedures. But as I explore later in this book, it may nonetheless be possible to be authentically, actively, radically pro-life, and learning how to do so ethically is the real challenge for people who believe the fetus has a soul. I'm absolutely opposed to compulsory pregnancy, but I've also evolved my position over the years. I began my pro-choice activism as a gung-ho young feminist who bought into received wisdom and bumper sticker slogans. I did that more than I trusted my own ability to understand an issue. I had an instinct that abortion rights were intrinsically tied to women's human rights, but I mainly absorbed what others, women I respected, had to say about the issue and its complexities. But since then, I've visited abortion clinics around the country. I've observed what happens to the remains of 8-week, 12-week, 14-week aborted fetuses. I've hosted a dozen women in my tiny apartment, people who traveled long distances to get 24-week abortions that take 3 days to accomplish. Since 1995, I've helped raise thousands of dollars to pay for low-income women's procedures. I've co-produced a documentary of women's abortion stories. I sat on the board of an abortion fund, and I've written on the subject for basically anyone who would have me, from Nation to Glamour to Jane. I haven't had an abortion to date, but I did become accidentally pregnant in 2004. That unplanned event resulted in my son's schooling and deepened my gratitude for how things have changed because of the feminist movement. Would I have been so encouraged to have a child out of wedlock without that movement? Would I have thrived if I didn't have access to a good job, in a sense that a woman shouldn't be dependent on a man any more than a fish be dependent on a bicycle? My pregnancy actually increased my interest in abortion. I embarked on this campaign, I Had an Abortion, in late 2003. By the time of the film of the same name was nearly complete in 2004, my appreciation for the profundity of the issue was growing daily, like my body. But the more I began to talk to people about their abortion experiences, the more questions I had. Really basic queries that I had simply never asked myself. Things like, how do women experience abortion?